blasphemy or freedom of expression? That's the subject of today's show, and to speak to us about this is Salim Chagtai from the Islamic Research and Education Academy, and on the telephone Alex Rook, a criminal barrister who also studied political sociology of Muslim countries in Turkey. Well, welcome to both of you.
Right.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Yep.
So Salim, I'm going to start with you. What does blasphemy mean to you?
Well, in Islam, it's pretty well defined. Basically, it's the insult of anything religious or sacred. And in Islam, Muslims have to be sensitive also to people of other religions. So for example, even though God in the Quran castigates idolatry in no uncertain terms, he also says in the Quran that tells the Muslims that you don't insult their gods lest they insult God back while they are not knowing and while they are ignorant. So even in Islam, we have even boundaries for Muslims on how they should react to people of things which are sacred and of religious value to other people. And it's not just religious things, it also extends to their honor, to their families and these things. So blasphemy is, to be honest, it comes under one big sort of bucket of insult. So we're not supposed to insult people, full stop, whether it's their lineage, whether it's their religion, whether it's their race or any such thing.
Okay. Well, Alex, how do you feel about blasphemy?
Well, personally, I'm not too fussed, and that's possibly a cultural difference. I think in the West, historically, we were very unpleasant to each other about religion. If you look at the Protestant-Catholic splits over the 16th, 17th century, that sort of time, and Europe was busy butchering itself. I think probably culturally we are expected to maybe keep our mouths a bit more shut about religious belief than perhaps is the case in the Muslim world. We're expected perhaps to be a bit thicker skinned, but that said, we had blasphemy, albeit only towards any view of religion held by the Church of England, on the statute books until 2006, I think it was. So it's only relatively recently that in this country we've perhaps chilled out a bit more about the subject.
Well, blasphemy really is open to interpretation, and this is something that controversial Muslim artist Sarah Maple explores in her work. So let's take a look. Well, you use religion and sexuality as quite strong themes in your work. Why did you choose to paint on this subject?
I think when I originally was making the work, and I was still a student at the time, I really wanted to look into the combination of Muslim people living in a Western culture and how the two can mix together and if they can. And that was based on my own personal experience of being raised in that household. My mum was Muslim and my dad sort of non-Muslim, and for me, I suppose sexuality was always seen as a Western thing. So for me, I kind of wanted to look at those two things and how they sort of can coexist, really.
Well, your works have received quite a bit of negative attention, especially Haram, which prompted death threats. Would you say some of your works are blasphemous?
I think that some people may feel that way, but with the Haram picture, I was again looking at my own experience, but then also at the time when I was painting it, there was a lot of negative backlash towards Muslim people, and obviously it was on the back of 9/11 and stuff like that. And what's kind of in the Quran and what is a cultural thing and what people certain rules and things that people think, if you don't do this, and you're not a good Muslim and stuff like that. And I was kind of looking at those things. And in the Quran, it doesn't actually, it says that you mustn't eat pork because it's unclean. At the time it was obviously unclean. And but it's not I don't believe from reading the Quran it's actually the most worst thing in the world, like I've been brought up to think it is. So for me to combine a pig with a Muslim woman was kind of looking at those things and questioning things that are cultural and rules and what actually makes you a good Muslim and spirituality and faith and all these things.
Why do you think Haram in particular is so controversial?
I think because it's the symbol of the pig is such an awful terrible thing in Islam, sort of combining that with the idea of a very religious woman, the two things, I think that is very unsettling for some people, and they can't. If it is a controversial image, and I did want to spark that debate, I think.
But surely, I mean, the Quran just says you shouldn't eat pork. It doesn't say anything about sort of touching pigs. Surely they're still part of, God's creatures or that
Exactly.
sort of thing.
Yeah, they're still animals. We still live alongside all these creatures and stuff. And I don't think we should hate on the pigs. Yeah. I'm not going to eat one.
How did you feel about the backlash that Haram caused?
Well, when I heard that the gallery had kind of been attacked and the windows had been smashed, the first thing I thought of, I don't want my parents to find out. That's the only thing I thought. I just don't want them to know. I don't want them to worry or be upset with me or anything like that. So I tried for them not to find out, but then it was on the news, so I couldn't really hide it. And someone from Hong Kong rang my dad and said, "Your daughter's on the news, this has happened." And I didn't want them to know. So I think there was an element of I didn't want to disappoint my parents in any way, but I've always stood by what I've done. I know that the work that I've made has come from a sincere, genuine place, so I don't regret anything that I've made. So, yeah.
Do you think people are too sensitive when it comes to religion?
I don't know. I think it depends on the individual, I think. I think it's easy to assume that majority strict Muslim women who wear a hijab are going to disapprove of my work when that isn't the case. I think a lot of people can see the deeper meaning behind it and stuff, and I think I don't know, I don't want to generalise anyone, you see.
As an artist, do you think anything is off limits? For example, would you do a painting with the Prophet Muhammad perhaps in it?
At the moment, no, because I don't have anything to say. But if I did, I don't know really. If I had something I really strongly wanted to say, then possibly. But I don't think so really. As
a Muslim, what would you class as blasphemy?
To me, I suppose any physical destroying of the Quran. I think I'd find that difficult. I don't know, because obviously I've kind of done it myself, so I don't know. I'd have to look into why the artist had done what they'd done. But I think if someone did destroy the Quran anyway, I'd find that difficult. I'd have to really understand the concept behind it, I think.
How do you think people should respond to blasphemy?
Well, the freedom of speech conversation is very difficult at the moment, I think, especially with Twitter and all the stuff that people are throwing at feminists and stuff, and it's like you can say whatever you want and be really abusive because it's my freedom of speech sort of thing. But at the same time, you don't. I mean, I wouldn't take back what had happened because that person has the right to object to what I'm doing, and I have the right to object to them. So.
For example, if you saw somebody burning the Quran, how would you react?
Probably be angry and ask them why they were doing it. Try and understand them, I think. Yeah. Because I know I've been in a situation where people haven't tried to understand what I'm doing. So I really find it, I do try and sort of like intercept my reaction sometimes, because sometimes other people that have done similar things to me, I immediately, even though I've done it myself, immediately I'm like, oh, and I think, no, you've got to look into why they've done it. So I don't know, I think we've just, listen to each other, I suppose, and not try not to judge each other.
Well, you're obviously pushing the boundaries with your work. Why do you think this is important?
I think because I think we kind of live in a time when we can't just accept things as the way they are. And we think, okay, so when we are growing up and we're surrounded by all these images and stuff, we think, right, okay, that's the way that I should live my life and that's what I should do and everything. But I think that when I was growing up, I never thought outside the box or anything. And I suppose I want to reach people who are kind of in that stage. And I just want to say you can actually think outside the box. You can, I don't know, live your life how you want to live it and try and have your freedom of choice and stuff. So I think we should always be trying to push our boundaries and expectations in life, I think.
So Salim, as a Muslim, how do you feel about Sarah's work?
Well, you know, it's obviously she's an artist. She's there to shock. You know, she's not there to draw water lilies and that's it. We find nowadays that art is being used in our culture to shock, and I believe that I'm not really, going to judge her intentions, but what I will say is that there is going to be a tendency to stand out from the rest of the art world by showing things which are controversial, maybe insulting, and maybe problematic. I mean, what I would say is that while there's nothing there which kind of like made me gasp in horror or anything like that. But what I would say is that there are certain things which are probably distasteful to a Muslim palate. And even in Islamic law, we have a concept of urf or custom, that certain things which are disliked or not allowed simply because they are distasteful culturally. So this is a very important element of Islamic law and therefore divine law. So Islamically, we as Muslims are meant to be sensitive to this. So, and that again, as I mentioned before, that it even extends to non-Muslims. So certain things that we are not meant to do as Muslims out of respect for people of other religions. So this is something which I would say is that, I'd probably say it's not a wise thing to do, and I think it would be probably insulting and offensive to a lot of people. To me, I would say that she is trying to shock. Offense is probably a big word. I'm probably quite thick-skinned maybe, but I would say that there's certain things in there which are, just not very palatable. That's all I would say.
Well, when you were watching the report, you actually sort of contradicted something she said. So what was it that you feel she got wrong?
Well, I mean, she mentioned something about that the Quran says that, that the reason why pork is forbidden is because it's unclean. The Quran doesn't actually say that. I mean, the Quran actually just says that there certain things are forbidden to you, and it doesn't necessarily go into the reasons as to why, because there are material as well as spiritual reasons why things may be forbidden in the religion of Islam. Having said that, she calls herself a Muslim, and in the report, she says that there are certain things that she would find quite difficult herself. For example, the burning of the Quran. But then you saw the conflict there, where she was sort of like reconciling that with realizing that that's a judgment on her side. So, but this is all within a very lovely kind of Western liberal secular. She's trying to put on the Western liberal secular lenses, but as a Muslim, that wouldn't make sense, because it was what Islam does is it gives you the viewpoint of looking at things through a divine truth and a divine reality. So in other words, those things I would say are those things which are, again, like for example, there was a woman holding a pig. Islamically, that would not be considered a forbidden act. Interesting enough, a lot of people might not like it. I mean, even I grew up in an environment where children, especially of a Pakistani and Indian or Bengali or South Asian background, thought it was even forbidden to say the word pig, whereas Islamically it isn't. And a friend of mine who's a teacher, he pointed out to one of the kids in his class, also from a South Asian background, he said, but the word pig is mentioned in the Quran. And that shocked his class, because culturally it's just seen as such because it's just not part of the culture. So we have to differentiate between what is cultural and what is religious. And that's also a very important thing to kind of distinguish here.
Okay. Well, Alex, from a Western point of view, how did you feel about these paintings?
Well, I had a look, because obviously you told me about them before the show, and I, in many ways, expected something a bit more inflammatory. I mean, I would agree with Salim. I wouldn't say anything there, I would guess, from an Islamic point of view, is blasphemous. There's quite a lot which is culturally edgy. I mean, certainly when you get these pictures of ladies pulling up their skirts, for example, and there's nothing religious there, but that is something that would offend certain cultural sensitivities more than others, and I think quite probably would offend the Daily Mail as much as it might offend readers of other written texts. She's obviously setting out to shock. She could have, done worse. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of a guy called Robert Mapplethorpe, who's an American artist who probably, hit a high watermark in upsetting Christians about 20-25 years ago, with a variety of photographs and pictures using crucifixes and other bits of Christian iconography. And this is Sarah Maple's stuff is nowhere near that. I mean, it tends to be perhaps culturally poking fun. I did, in fact, think probably if there was anything there that was likely to most cause offence, it is the woman holding the pig. So I went and researched things before talking and listening to people, and agree with what Salim says. I mean, the Islamic law prohibits eating it, not picking them up.
Yeah.
But you can see she probably just hopes to get a reaction.
Yeah.
She's an artist. She's trying to make a name for herself. Not much point in getting upset about that, I think.
I mean, even the picture you saw in the background is a picture of, I think it was her, wearing a hijab and actually smoking a cigarette. You see that in Egypt all the time. There's
All
nothing.
the time.
There's nothing taboo about that at all. You probably saw that in Turkey as well yourself, Alex. So,
Well, all the time. In fact, the other day I was looking at a picture that was very National Geographic style of a young lady in Tehran smoking a cigarette, and showing a bit of hair from the front of her veil. So I mean, there's nothing there which is, hasn't been seen in the last 15 or 20 years. I suppose it's the juxtaposition of images, and she's trying to get a reaction that way. But I don't think anyone with a balanced, thoughtful view would consider anything there really to be blasphemous. It's culturally edgy, is probably the right way of putting it.
Well, Salim, obviously we'll go back to that painting Harem with the woman holding the pig. Do you think a lot of blasphemy then is through ignorance? Because actually when you look into it, the Quran doesn't forbid anyone handling pigs. So is it ignorance?
There's a combination. There's a combination of ignorance because right now the Muslim world generally after colonialism has been detached to religion. It's rediscovering its religion and its identity. So a lot of the Muslim world is in that position. And then, as I mentioned, that there's a cultural element. So there's certain things where people don't know what is cultural and what is religious. So, for example, I mentioned just now, for some people, even to mention the word pig is just seen as just disgusting. So while they may not think it's necessarily forbidden from a point of view that you're sinful for saying it, they would just not do it in their environment because it might offend somebody to even use that word. So yes, I would say in summary, yes, there is a fair amount of ignorance as to what Islamic law states on a number of positions, and this being one of them.
Yeah. Well, Alex, do you think that people are too black and white when it comes to religion? Do you think that there's almost like a dogma there?
Well, religions, yeah. Straight answer, but it goes on a number of levels. I think a lot of non-religious people are very black and white about it, very dogmatic, can be very abrasive. I think one thing possibly people always have to bear in mind, and we are drawing a lot of contrasts here, West and East, is literacy is something that's been fairly diffuse in Western Europe, certainly over the last 150, 200 years, and the printing press and so on has made a difference. Whereas if you look at, Turkey, for example, which obviously is a much more advanced country educationally relative to a lot of other countries in the region, it's only the last couple of generations, rarely, that they've had mass literacy, and where you see perhaps the biggest and hottest-headed protests against blasphemous things like the Danish cartoons or the Van Gogh film of The Innocence of Muslims. The people who are protesting most vigorously, I suspect, haven't seen the film, haven't read the book, but they've heard about it through others, and doubtless what they hear is going to inflame them. But I would say I used to be in a set of chambers where there was a Christian barrister who was very active in a group called the Christian Voice, there was a Jerry Springer opera about 6 or 7 years ago, and this guy was on TV complaining about it, getting very, very upset, and I saw him holding a television one day and disappearing into a room. Asked what he was going to do, and he was going to watch a thing he'd just been complaining about on TV. So, people have a way of complaining about things they have perhaps been told about by others. I think it falls upon people, if they have a brain, to try and use it and to work out whether these things are genuinely insulting or not. A lot of people go with what other people tell them.
Welcome back to Forbidden Talk. Today we're looking at blasphemy versus freedom of speech. Well, joining me is Salim Chagtai from the Islamic Research and Education Academy, and on the telephone, Alex Rook, who is a criminal barrister who also studied political sociology of Muslim countries in Turkey. Well, we've just been talking about controversial Muslim artist Sarah Maple, and I think both of you actually agreed that it wasn't that offensive, her images.
Yeah,
but
sorry,
first,
Sarah.
Yeah.
What I'd say, just to clarify, I would say that, you see, I personally am not offended, but I can see how other people will be offended. So I would say they're offensive to maybe a Muslim audience, but I would say that, I personally am not, particularly, I haven't seen all the pictures. I've seen the two that I saw, I would say I'm not offended by, but I would say by and large they would be offensive to a Muslim audience.
Okay.
So just to clarify that.
Well, let's see what people in London thought.
Yeah, no, the pig is not real.
Muslims, they don't handle pigs.
Yeah. So do you think this is a shocking image, or?
Yeah, of course.
I think it's fine. You should take it personally, I think.
I wouldn't think of the subject, I look at what it actually is and the texture and the way it's been painted, so I think art's subjective, everyone has their own opinion. It's interesting.
I think it's just normal, nothing wrong with it. She could carry a pig, what's wrong with it? I believe so. It's up to everybody's up to him what you think, but I find by me, she could carry pigs or a sheep or a cow, doesn't make no difference.
Is that pork?
Yeah.
That's pork, yeah? Yeah, then Islam that's pork, we don't like it.
So Salim, what did you think about what these people in London had to say on these paintings?
Yeah, I think it pretty much reflects exactly what I was talking about before you showed that piece, because there are things which Muslims are going to find distasteful, and where there is again, it depends on her intention, and as you saw from the piece when she was talking, that she's a person who classifies herself as Muslim, but perhaps she doesn't really know where the boundaries are, but at the same time she wants to make a name for herself as she's an artist, and that's what artists do. So I'm not surprised by that reaction, and I think at the end of the day a lot of those people were offended by that because of what she's trying to do. But if they saw, for example, a Muslim lady in real life on a farm rescuing a pig and holding it in the same way, it wouldn't have that same reaction. So it's all about context. It's all about, if you're showing a deliberate image like that, which is meant to stir the emotions, then obviously that's going to be very different to seeing that in real life. So again, it's all about context, and it's all about the nuance, really.
Well, do you think that Muslims are a little bit too sensitive when it comes to blasphemy? Because if you think about the innocence of Muslims, that sparked violent riots. And then if anybody says anything really about the Prophet Muhammad, then, all hell breaks loose. So do you think they're too sensitive?
Well, I think the problem is that I think the sensitivity is correct, because in there it was basically a Christian man, an Arab Christian, who is documented to have a profound hatred of Islam, and let's not make any bones about that, who's making a very insulting depiction about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace be upon him. Now, this in Islam we would not do for anybody of other religions. We are forbidden to make fun of any leader of any other religion or any founder or any such thing. So in the same way, I think love for your brother what you love for yourself is what the one of the maxims of Islam is. So I think the level of sensitivity was spot on. However, the question is how we air that grievance. I do not call for or advocate the smashing up of embassies or basically punishing people that are not responsible for this. I believe that there should be lawful protests, there should be debate and discussion and dialogue. There's no problem with that. And in Islam, we have to make a difference there's a difference between insulting and intellectual dialogue and discussion. The Muslim world has had a history for the last 1400 years of discussing with people of different religions, even discussing questions as to whether the Prophet himself was a true prophet or not. Now you would think, well, that would be quite offensive, but no, if it's done in an academic setting with Christians or Jews who don't recognize him to be a prophet, as has been done and it's been recorded in the chronicles of the caliphs in Baghdad, that there were debates and discussions like that with people of other religions, and there was no problem with that. So the question is, how do we discuss these issues? Do we use art to, and I think art is sometimes used as a kind of a smokescreen to basically jibe at people without actually explaining through intellectual discourse what it is that they're trying to say.
Yeah. Alex, would you agree? Do you think Muslims can be too sensitive?
I'm an R on that one. I think there's certainly in our media a tendency to focus on the people who are getting upset, and I think in a way something like these Sarah Maple photographs, a typical, not saying you of course, journalistic reaction would be to take it to the person who you think is most likely to be upset and see what they've got to say about it. So in a way we perhaps get a rather distorted snapshot of who's getting upset. I mean, there's lots of Muslims as well. You know, if you're talking about a bunch of middle-class intellectuals in Istanbul, that's one thing. If you go to a village in, you know, certain parts of Pakistan or Afghanistan, you're going to get a very different reaction. But, you know, are Muslims oversensitive? I suppose to some extent, as Salim says, that the sensitivity is built in because of, you know, the law, that you don't insult this and you don't insult that, and it's consequently people getting outraged at something which is, you know, an illegality. But I think, you know, in a way there's probably quite a lot of things other than religious sensitivity often coming out with these things. I think possibly it is often seen as an East-West thing. I mean, say the Danish cartoonist or the Van Gogh film. It was very much how dare they sort of come up with this blasphemy without really knowing what they're talking about. They're just going out of the way to be offensive, you know, to us as maybe Easterners being Westerners. You know, it's maybe a bit too redolent of a colonial imperialistic boot. But I think also the difference possibly between Western cultures and Eastern cultures, if I can generalize this way, is in a way there's quite a lot of pressure to be seen to be a good Muslim. So, you know, in a way, socially, it's probably a good idea for an individual to get upset, to be seen to be upset, to be standing up for it, whereas social pressure on us in London certainly is to chill out about it and not let ourselves be affected.
Salim,
So
what do you
there are
think?
differences, I think, for the reactions. We have to be careful, really, whether we're just choosing to focus on the 10 people jumping up and down or the several hundred people off camera who are a bit more relaxed about things.
Yeah, I think that, you know, absolutely, you know, very intelligent comments from Alex. But, you know, it's exactly right. I think the place in which the media focused upon were those places where they don't necessarily have a culture of expressing their dislike of something in a more kind of intellectual way. And there also some of those places are places where, for example, in a lot of those countries which are in the Muslim world, a lot of those people are repressed anyway. So that is the only way that they can vent their frustration, because there is no other way for them to really express in an articulate way what it is that they find offensive. Now, interestingly enough, I found probably the most, I suppose the most Western liberal way of making the point about the Danish cartoons was actually in Iran. And that's not a regime I agree with at all, and I don't agree with many things in that society. But one newspaper, what they did was they were trying to show that, well, in the West we have taboos as well. So they had a cartoon of Anne Frank in bed with Hitler. Right? Now that would be extremely offensive to anybody who's been through the Holocaust or witnessed it or campaigning against it. But the point was that you have your sacred cows as well. And I thought that point was very well made. So in other words, if you're gonna, don't throw stones if you live in a greenhouse, because you know what's going to happen. So I think we have to have this discussion and discourse. But what the feeling is that in the name of art, the so-called Western liberal kind of intelligentsia, they can kind of throw mud at what they see to be as a backward religious underclass, yet there's nothing coming back. So I think that there's a whole kind of backdrop behind this, and Alex is right that for example, I was in discussions with the law firm who were thinking of actually taking Google, who own YouTube, to court over the airing of that film of the innocence of Muslims, because they were trying to argue from a legal point of view that this is inciting hatred. So that's an intelligent response, and I think that shows like this and anywhere where Muslims can articulate what it is, because a lot of people don't understand that literally that the Prophet Muhammad is more beloved to a Muslim than their own family. Now that may be very hard for a non-religious person to accept, that how can you love somebody who lived so far away from you 1400 years ago? I think the closest thing you'll get is probably Christians' feeling towards Jesus. Very similar. So, this is something which you've got to understand, that, there's a lack of empathy here. And that's really what we're trying to get at. And that's what Muslims have been trying to say, that, look, if you are an inclusive Western liberal democracy, why can't you at least empathize with people who are different to you? And Alex made the point very well, where he said that, well, there is almost like an arrogance on that side, a bigotry, if you like, from certain Western liberals who will say, well, you should be able to take this. I mean, says who? Offence is in the heart of the offended, surely.
Well, Salim, blasphemy laws in the Middle East, they can be quite direct with their wording, which says you can't challenge the divine being. How do you think that affects things like science and education?
Well, first of all, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, from my experience of traveling the Middle East, there's never been, there are atheists that live and work in the Middle East, and there's discussion in the workplace about whether God exists or not. So I don't necessarily think that that is true. I think what there is usually in Muslim countries is that there is you cannot insult God or the Prophet or any such, which are called the signs of Islam, so to speak. However, and really there is no problem between Islam and science, because we haven't had the same history that Christian Europe has had. Because in Islam, the whole discussion of the Quran is a book that really invites human beings to think. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, it says that, do you not use your brains? And it invites people to think, and it makes sense. Surely if God made the world and God has sent down revelation to inform human beings as to what their purpose of life is, then why would there be any disconnect between the one who made the material world, and the one who's sending down guidance for it? So Islam has had never any problem with that. Islam has actually had a very rich history of encouraging science and technology and medicine, and which we in Europe greatly benefited from. So there really isn't any real major disconnect. There is a discussion about evolution, for example, and even then there is the whole discussion about whether does it apply to human evolution, does it apply to non-human evolution? And science itself is not necessarily a yardstick of truth. It's really a set of examining certain results, taking specific results, and then generalizing it. So there's a lot of room for error. So a lot of people think that science is, I was going to say the gospel truth, but it will think that it's 100% truth. But as a person who studied the philosophy of science myself, the philosophers of science and the people behind science know very well that how science changes. 1 minute potatoes are good for you, caffeine's bad for you, and then there'll be another study to show the opposite. 1 minute wine is good for you and good for your heart, and the next minute is bad for your liver. So there's all kinds of things which are constantly changing in science, and science is by no means a static thing, whereas religious guidance, in by and large, should be consistent and should be constant.
Okay. Well, Alex, do you agree? Do you think?
I certainly agree with Salim that. I think in a way we're saying, look, the amount of science going on under Islam or in Islamic areas, used to be a lot. Europe was very much in the Dark Ages until the Renaissance, which many feel only happened because of the chasing out of people who knew about science from Andalusian Spain. When the Spanish took it over, it had a peculiar effect of disseminating scientific knowledge. It tended to be Arabs or Muslims who knew about it rather than the West at that point. Blasphemy laws shouldn't necessarily hold back science and education. I think possibly the problem might be that the kind of cultures that set big store by having blasphemy laws on the statute books tend perhaps to be the sorts of cultures which also be shutting down other forms of discussion, other forms of intellectual freedom, and that plainly will have an effect on science and education. You only need, I suppose, to look at the amount of books published, typically in the United States or Western Europe on the subject of science, and how many come out of the Middle East on an annual basis. There's a massive disconnect, but then there's a lot of Middle Eastern scientists in Western Europe and the States doing very well. I don't think there's a huge problem between blasphemy laws and education, but there is a cultural thing, and I think anyone perhaps who's taught in Saudi Arabia might be able to talk to you better on that subject than me.
I would say that, just to add to that, what Alex has said is right, in the sense that, and I mentioned this before, that as long as the discussion is intellectual, and science by its nature is going to be intellectual discussion, then I think Muslims generally don't have a problem with that. They can sit around the table and have a discussion with an atheist very gladly about whether evolution is true, the origins of human beings, and our purpose of life, and etc. So there's no problem with that culture, and even in a Middle Eastern context, there would again be no problem with that because it's intellectual. When it becomes insulting or offensive is when it's taken out of that intellectual discourse and into the realm of art, I would say, where the point has to be made without words or done in a very subversive way, and that's where the problem lies. So for example, the Satanic verses, all of it's very allegorical, but it's clear. You can see that a parody is being made between certain characters and their religious counterparts, if you like, and that's where that's where we have to draw the line. Interestingly enough, I would say that Muslims as well should have been as equally as offended, for example, by the Jerry Springer opera, because it blasphemed the great prophet of theirs, which is Jesus. And I think we Muslims have got to be more consistent in that. And again, I don't believe in violence or anything like that. And I agree with Alex that we should at least watch the supposed offended thing. There's nothing to say that it's forbidden to watch something for the sake of informing yourself about what somebody's doing. And I think we need to do a bit more of that. And that way we can have a more kind of nuanced discussion and not lead to the polarized debate that we have right now. We can explain to people who are not necessarily of a religious background that why something like this is going beyond the bounds.
Yeah. But do you think that blasphemy laws, this kind of thing, can be used for other agendas?
Yes, like with anything is open to use and abuse, and it can be. I would say that in recent memory, I don't actually know that I just remember that during my lifetime that the first major controversy was the Satanic verses. Now I believe that the Ayatollah Khomeini, the late Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, I do believe he actually used that to try and gain political leverage over a majority Sunni international population. And he obviously being a leading Shiite cleric. Yeah. So he got a lot of support from Sunni people because he was seen to be taking a stand. And then we have the infamous, the fatwa, which fatwa means religious opinion. It doesn't mean a death threat, but it became synonymous with that, where he gave an opinion that Salman Rushdie should be basically executed and killed by whichever Muslim wherever if he finds them, which is very unorthodox, because Islam, the majority of Muslim scholars throughout history would say that in a non-Islamic state you would never enact any of the Sharia laws, which would then go against the state. It would be seen as subversion. So yes, in a word, yes, it can be used, and I believe in that case it was used deliberately, because there were certain things which were not offensive to Shiite sensitivities, but were offensive to Sunni sensitivities. But he capitalized on that, and so yes, it can be in some cases.
Alex, my final question for you. How do you think then people should respond to blasphemy?
With equanimity. I would never say anyone should go around killing anyone, whatever certain analyses of old texts might say. But at the same time, I do sometimes despair. I wouldn't say I despaired at Sarah Maple, but she does seem to be, and it's perhaps a young thing, it can be quite fun stirring people up, and sometimes perhaps you can stir people up and not actually intend to be insulting, but you have an insulting effect on people. Generally speaking, there's a lot to be said for my freedom stops where yours begins, and to quote from the Bible, which I don't often do unto others as you would have done unto yourselves. But I personally am not a big fan of blasphemy laws. Okay. I think they herald a whole load of other freedom of speech problems.
Yeah. And Salim, what do you think? How do you agree?
Yeah, I think my view is going to be pretty much what Islam states on it, which is that, again, blasphemy laws should be there, but they should be consistent. Like right now in the UK, English law, I'm not sure about Scottish law, and again Alex would probably enlighten us on this, is that Judaism and Christianity is protected, yet Islam and other religions aren't. The only commonality is when there's incitement to hatred. So again, I would say, look, in a Western context, where the blasphemy is most likely going to occur, then really we should use all legal means, and there are plenty of legal means. We should try and get the law changed. I know Alex I thought Alex would have appreciated more work coming his way, but with more blasphemy laws. But
I'd change my tune totally if there were blasphemy laws.
Yeah, your charge out rate might be slightly different.
Money in the next world, please.
Yes, absolutely. You spoke like a great Muslim. And that's it really. That what we want, and really, I think there needs to be equal parity, because ultimately the only way that society is going to progress is by intellectual discourse. So there should be intellectual discourse and as at IERA, at the Islamic Education Research Academy, we invite and pay for atheists to come and debate with our speakers in a very kind of congenial setting, where they will say things which are blasphemous, inverted commas, but because they're in an intellectual debate context, Muslims are not up in arms about it. And that is the way really that that's part of our Muslim tradition. That is the way in which the Prophet and his apostles and his companions would actually discuss with people. So people would say, okay, we don't believe you're a prophet, and and obviously the hidden implication is that you're an imposter, but we can still do business. We're still going to be citizens of your state. So this is something which has been going on in Islam for a very long time, the whole concept of pluralism. So that's fine, but let's have rules and laws which do say that, look, keep it to intellectual discourse, keep it out of the realm. If we keep it out of the realm outside of that, because it'll do is it'll cause more harm. Because we can argue about the intellectual or lack thereof capabilities of the hornets, but if we go around kicking hornets' nests, what are you going to get? You're going to get a lot of stings, and I think we should avoid that in order to create harmony in society.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we got left. So, Salim, thank you for joining us. Alex, thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay. Well, now it's your turn to join the discussion. So if you have any comments or feedback, you can email us at forbiddentalk@levant.tv or find us on Facebook. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.